Hey, everybody, welcome to our Week in Review. I am Stephen Cox, host of the Washington State Indivisible podcast and the Indivisible Town Hall series.
Hi, I'm Shasti Conrad, chair of the King County Democrats.
And I'm Will Casey, a managing partner of Left Wing Digital.
So look, you guys, we were going to do like this whole discussion this week about how the GOP is imploding and there's a GOP civil war going on and how the Democrats could maybe exploit that. But, you know, we took a look at the lineup of the upcoming CPAC and it's looking like national and state Republicans are just caving to Trump. So this is the situation for now anyway. So we thought we'd maybe look at something else that we have some control over, specifically the GOP's radical anti-democratic agenda that is happening at the state level and what we can do to stop it. So here are the numbers. There are currently 160 bills in 33 state legislatures that are aimed at restricting voting rights. And also, there are a bunch of states with GOP trifectas that are getting ready to just gerrymander the shit out of everything in their favor. So Democrats need to respond here. New DNC Chair Jamie Harrison tweeted recently that Democrats need to pass H.R. 1 and H.R. 4 in order to put a stop to this and win in 22 and beyond. And of course, you Indivisible members will recognize these as part of our national agenda. And H.R. 1 is being voted on in the House next week. So this is a good time to talk about it. H.R. 1 is also known as the For the People Act. Will, let's start with you, brother. What are some key things that H.R. 1 would do?
It's going to tackle a lot of the problems that have made our democracy, frankly, so anti-democratic here in the last couple of election cycles. So it's a sweeping piece of legislation that would enact some much-needed reforms, specifically limiting foreign interference in our elections, putting a cap on money in politics, increasing our election security, making sure that every single state has a nonpartisan, independent redistricting commission rather than letting state legislatures, like you were just saying, gerrymander both their own seats and congressional seats so that voters get to pick their politicians instead of the other way around. It would also expand early voting access, allow for same-day registration, automatic voter registration, and vote by mail, all things that we have here in Washington State and have had for a little while now, but a lot of other states are still, behind the times in that respect. So critical legislation that absolutely must pass Congress.
It is a bill that absolutely affirms the Democrats' belief in small d democracy. Shasti, how do you see the importance of H.R. 1 and also H.R. 4, which is known as the John Lewis Voting Rights Act?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not hyperbolic to say that it might be one of the most important pieces of legislation that we've seen in well over a decade. To Will's point of what he just laid out, I mean, it's literally like every key part of democracy that has been under attack by the Republican Party could be addressed through this legislation. And so it's incredibly important. And for the John Lewis Voting Act, H.R. 4, I mean, it is like it's sort of poetic justice that, one of the first key pieces of legislation under a Biden administration would be to honor the legacy of John Lewis, who was one of the most important members of Congress, in the 20th century and the 21st century. And that mirrors, my experience of the Obama administration, when we were in the Affordable Care Act battle, so much of that was in honor of Ted Kennedy. And that Congress really pulled together in wanting to honor a long-serving member who had really lived up to this idea of what public service is all about. And I think that we have a real opportunity to do that here with honoring John Lewis through H4, but also through H.R. 1. And that it really, I think since January 6th, it put this spotlight on like, what can democracy survive? And this helps us say, yes, if we pass it through. And I think the entire Democratic House caucus signed on to co-sponsor. So, the battle, as it continues to be, will be in the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, it really is hard to overstate the stakes of this. And I'll just go ahead and say it as you're saying it. I mean, I think the future of our democracy may rest on this. The good news is, as I understand it, Will, is that the numbers are behind us on this. People really do like this bill. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Data for Progress, a progressive polling firm, partnered with Crooked Media, the Pod Save America folks, to do a poll recently of 1,500 some likely voters nationwide. And even across all parties, it's extremely popular. 57% of Republican voters say that they want the bill when they are described a relatively neutral framing of the bill. and even universal vote by mail, a part of the bill that's read by voters as most partisan because of all that disinformation that Shasti referenced about the 2020 election that led to that armed insurrection in January. 57% of all voters support universal vote by mail. And so for those of us talking about this to people who might not be familiar with those individual provisions, this is the most convincing frame that the poll tested, particularly with independent voters, so people who are less rigidly partisan and lower information generally on sort of the day-to-day happenings in politics. So here's how they describe the bill. We need this bill to protect civil rights and voting rights because everyone should have an equal voice in our democracy, no matter what you look like, where you come from, or how much money you have. And that's really the core of this appeal, is that it puts everybody on a level playing field and actually requires politicians to appeal to a majority of Americans in order to get elected. What a novel concept.
Yeah, what a novel concept indeed. And I always keep thinking back about how, hey, Republicans, maybe you could actually adopt some policies that people like and would vote for. Nah, no, we'll just rig the system. Much easier. So look, HR 1 is popular. We know that, but we also know that it's not popular enough to get 60 in the Senate. And we know this because we couldn't get more than 7 Republican senators to vote to convict Trump after he literally tried to have them killed for doing their job. So that means that we need to get rid of the filibuster so that legislation like HR 1 can pass with a straight majority. Will, staying with you on this, just briefly, tell us about the history of the filibuster and why it exists.
So in a much abbreviated format that's not going to do the entire history here justice, I think it's important for people to understand. That's fair. There's a lot of material out there that I'm synthesizing here. Folks can read Ezra Klein as well as a number of national commentators who have been out on this issue. But I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand because it sounds like sort of arcane Senate rules. This must have been around since the founding. It absolutely was not. It just was sort of an accident of history that after the Senate amended some of its rules to remove some, at the time, things that were thought of as redundant, people sort of discovered that there wasn't a way to force people to stop talking. And that didn't really become a common tool of senators to stop legislation until the Jim Crow era. I mean, that's when this really picked up, and people need to understand the context and the history of the filibuster, that this is a tool of institutional racism, right? This is how Democratic senators in the South were able to prevent things like the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Acts, and a routine number of anti-lynching laws that were stifled in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And still lynching is not a federal crime, which is ridiculous. And I think that it's important for people to understand that that's what we're calling back to here when people say they want to honor tradition. What they're honoring is the tradition of the Senate using minority rule in order to, strip rights, including civil rights and voting rights, from Americans of color. So if that's the tradition that you want to uphold, you should definitely be in favor of sustaining the filibuster.
Well, I mean, what I hear you saying is that it was designed literally to prevent pieces of legislation like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Shasti, how do you see the filibuster's role right now?
I mean, exactly that. I mean, it is preserving institutional racism, as Will just took us through the history. It has been overly used whenever there's been legislation that would impact people of color, particularly Black people's persuasion ability to be able to get more rights, expanded rights. I think that, if we have an opportunity to kill the filibuster and we don't do it, we are complicit in it. We've spent the last year basically talking about how do we change these systems? How do we attack institutional racism? And if Democrats choose not to do this, then we have to be held responsible for that. So the time is now. President Obama, started talking about the filibuster as, a relic of the Jim Crow era in the last couple of years, and it absolutely it is that. And I think also that it's in some ways it's almost like putting back in 3/5 a person, because it has made it so that.
Shasti's frozen up there. When she unfreezes, I'm going to ask her to remake that point because it's really important.
Sorry about that.
So you're back. So I would love for you to remake the point that you were just making about how it really is almost like a return to 3/5 of a person.
Yeah, the filibuster is that, because what it does is it limits the representation of districts that are majority people of color, majority Black. Um, the fact that DC still does not have any kind of federal representation, when it is a majority Black city in the South. You have large communities of color that just helped us win. They helped us win the Senate. They helped us win the Biden presidency. And here we have the filibuster that is kept in place so that those same people's votes are not being reflected in Congress. And so we have to do this. And we as Democrats have to remember, we won. We
Right.
seem to keep forgetting we won. So this is the time. Like, if you're not going to use this type of power to end these types of relics, when you're the winner, then how are you going to expect people to continue to vote you in, hoping that things change?
Exactly right. Exactly right. I mean, it's bitterly ironic that the Democrats are ultimately the ones who are standing in the way of this and the obstacles, and we know who they are. So it's Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, Michael Bennet of Colorado, Dianne Feinstein of California, Mark Warner of Virginia, and Patrick Leahy of Vermont. And even Biden has said that he's unsure about this. These are Democrats. What strikes me as odd about this is that, with the exception of Sinema, these are Democrats who have watched almost nothing get done in the Senate for almost a decade because of this very thing. So, Will, just in the interest of kind of understanding the context, help us understand why they might want to keep it.
Well, I think it's frankly easier for those senators to be opposed to something that doesn't really grab people's attention, like, filibuster reform, when they don't want to necessarily be out there against, popular positions like raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, right? And that's something that, of those folks you just mentioned, Joe Manchin is the only one who's actually come forward and said, I actually oppose this, and here's my preferred alternative, which doesn't come close to meeting the need of working people in this country. But I think that it's something that they prefer, as our client has said, the politics of inaction rather than the politics of action, right? They would prefer the consequences of, trying to say that, oh, well, we wanted to do this, but Republicans kept us from doing so because of the filibuster, rather than having to say, like, I actually voted against, popular policy X, Y, or Z, right? And I think that that's something that we just need to make clear that we're not going to tolerate any longer, because we can, people have gotten smart to this situation, and understand that, we do have the power to make change here, and it's on us to actually, use that power that we have.
Yeah, I mean, it's an easy excuse to get out of uncomfortable votes. Just ask Mitch McConnell. And I think the reason why he hasn't torpedoed it yet is because a lot of really terrible shit comes out of the House, and he doesn't want to have to be put in the position of having to put it up to the Senate for a vote. Shasti, what do you make, speaking of Mitch McConnell, which I try never to do if I can help it, but here we are. What do you make of the think about what the GOP will do with this when they're in power argument?
I mean, I understand it, but I also think, like, they don't get to determine how we do our business. They lost. And they also just decided that it was okay that, there was an insurrection, and that basically, that their side could push democracy to the brink. So we have to play our game. I will say that one of the things I did appreciate this past week was, for a brief moment, and I can't remember which senator it was, but there was a senator who turned to one of the Republicans and said, like, I'm not going to get lectured by you when you just didn't allow, you just allowed Trump off the hook. You don't get to tell me about some sort of moral high ground. And that is the exact type of energy that I'm looking for Democrats right now. It's like, it's unfortunate, but we have to be the adults in the room who are setting up for accountability and boundaries. And we're saying, like, this is how this is going to go. You're nothing. Like, you have given up the right to be able to have a say in what's happening here, because you were willing, you'd pick party over country, because you just sold out democracy. And so I just think, like, you have to bring that energy and stop trying to play the Republicans game.
And as Republicans, a few famous Republicans are want to say, elections have consequences. So, Will, we know who the targets are here. We live in Washington State. How do we put pressure on these senators, the ones that I mentioned, the 6 senators I mentioned, in a way that yields results?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with, contacting our own representatives and our own senators to make sure that they have the language and they understand that we're supportive of them, taking this step, right? Because it's not a small thing we're asking people to do. These senators have lived through an experience where in their minds, if they didn't have access to the filibuster, then the rights to reproductive health care might have been taken away, or even worse, voting reforms might have been or more or discriminatory voting laws might have been put on the books at the federal level. But we have to start coding opposition to repealing the filibuster as a Republican policy position, right? Because this is in its current form just another example of how the modern Republican Party is resorting to technicalities and procedure to preserve the fact that a minority of Americans are ruling over the majority of us. And so we just need to keep hammering home that all Republicans oppose repealing the filibuster and most Democrats are for it, right? Do we want Manchin and Sinema and the rest of those folks that you named to feel like they are siding with their colleagues who refuse to convict someone who tried to have them killed? Because I think that's a pretty powerful, way to persuade these folks. And I think, making sure that our senators who are on the right side of this issue understand what it is that is required here and what the stakes of this conflict are, and that we're going to have their backs if they take that bold stance. I think that's the way that we can be effective.
Yep, right across the board. Yeah, Shasti, what do you think?
I mean, I agree with Will. I think it's time we have to call their bluff. We have to just say like, okay, like we're moving forward. So you're either getting on the train and coming with us or you're not. You're getting left behind. And you want to be left behind with Marjorie Green Taylor and like this case of nut jobs? Like, no, you don't. You want to come hang out over here. So, I think, I'm being facetious, but there's very serious things that are at stake. There's things like access to reproductive health care. There's the Affordable Care Act. There's so much that is like has been on the table, and Republicans had no problem trying to turn that over the minute that they could. And so we have to push back against that. We also have to remember that we don't know how long we have all three bodies, right? We maybe have 2-year window to get some really significant shit done. And so we cannot play it scared. We have to go for it. We also have to understand that this like the messaging of the value and like of reluctance in the face of GOP obstruction, it's like that being patient and like we just can't pass filibuster reform. Like it doesn't work. It doesn't work on people. Just last night, when people were talking about the parliamentarians' decision around minimum wage, like people are struggling, like they want their checks because they're facing eviction and they can't feed their families, and they've been sick. Like that's what they care about. We used to say in DC all the time, it's like nobody wants to know about how the sausage gets made. And by delaying and dragging out these types of battles around like the filibuster and stuff, it just turns off Americans from wanting to be a part of the process. And we just have to play from a power role and a power place.
100%. I mean, the way that you're describing it, this battle around the filibuster and trying to get anything done makes it sound like a parlor game. It is unbelievably offensive and tin-eared to the needs of just millions of suffering Americans right now. But if you want to appeal to the needs of the elected officials themselves, I would say, listen, if the Democrats can't get anything done because the filibuster is locking things down in the Senate, you're going to lose likely in 2022 and 2024. And I think that's a good incentive right there. Will, as you mentioned, even reliably blue senators, a lot of them are still on the fence about this thing. So we in blue states have work to do to stiffen their resolve. I thought we'd do a little role playing. What do you say? So, Will, you will be the activist, and I'll be an underpaid staffer.
Sounds good.
All right, you give me 3 solid talking points. Hello, Senator blah blah's office.
Well, thank you for taking my call. I'm calling to urge the senator to support the For the People Act and vote to end the filibuster if Republican obstructionists use it to keep Americans from having free and fair elections. I just want the senator to know that we can't allow a relic of the Jim Crow era to block progress on ensuring every American can safely and easily cast their vote. And if we allow the filibuster to stop the federal government from guaranteeing that no state can block voters of color from the ballot box, then we're just as complicit in their voter suppression as Mitch McConnell and every Republican senator. So that's why I'm confident that the senator you work for will do the right thing and take whatever steps are needed to pass the For the People Act, including repealing the filibuster. Thanks for passing along my input.
And scene. Very, very nice. Nicely done, brother. Yeah, outstanding. That is exactly right. So, if anybody needs that, you can just hit the 15-second rewind, and that'll be there for you. So, we're going to say so long to you right now, and we're going to bring in our friend Rich Smith, and let's see if we can do this here. Technology. Hello, Rich.
Hello, Stefan and
How are you,
Justin.
brother? Good to see you, man. Rich, of course, writes for The Stranger. How are things going? I can only imagine that this is a very hectic time to be writing for The Stranger. And yet, now that I think back on like the last year or so with the pandemic and the protests and everything that's been going on in Seattle, I'm just now all of a sudden I moved to ask, do you sleep? When do you sleep, man?
I do sleep. I'm a pretty regimented person, but I don't get to sleep as much as I like to, unfortunately.
Nor do I. But actually, it's not for lack of trying. I'm just middle-aged. I have no idea what's going on inside my brain. Okay, so listen, we brought you in to talk about the very kind of advocacy that Will was just laying out, but here at the state level. So you recently wrote a piece about a bill in the state legislature that would prevent insurance companies from using people's credit scores to set insurance rates. This is a practice that was news to a lot of people, myself included. The bill has now passed out of committee, but it no longer resembles anything like how it was written. Let's start here. First and foremost, Rich, why is it harmful for people's credit scores to be used in determining their rates?
It's so dumb. Well, I think this has been just to your first point. It's been an issue for, I think, over 20 years in the legislature. When Washington's insurance commissioner, Mike Kreidler, first got elected, he wanted to end the practice then. He called for the practice to end now, 20 years after the first time he did it, and there's still these problems. This is kind of like a long time simmering issue. But to answer your question, it's harmful to use credit scores to set insurance rates because low-income people tend to have lower credit scores than rich people. So the practice ends up making poor people pay more for auto insurance, let's say, which is mandatory, than rich people. And black and brown people are overrepresented among those with low incomes, thanks to centuries of public policy designed to plunder their wealth. So the practice also ultimately spits out a racist outcome. Washington's insurance commissioner, Kreidler, notes that 1 in 5 black people have a credit score below 620, which would count as low, compared to 1 in 19 whites. So that gives you a sense of the disparate impact when you use credit scores to do this. And again, since the state forces everyone to buy car insurance under penalty of fine, then the state is basically forcing poor people to get poorer while buttressing structurally racist policies.
Yeah, what you said I think was so key. Can you say a little bit more about those numbers of like how much more are lower income and people of color actually paying, and how much do the insurance companies make off of that?
There's a January study that the Consumer Federation of America, it's a consumer group, put out, and they used a profile of an auto insurance shopper in South Seattle. And shopped around for insurance rates from different insurance companies. And the only thing that they changed about the profile was what the person's credit score was. I think they did 35,000 quotes, gathered 35,000 quotes and just changed up the credit scores. And ultimately what they found is that poor people or people with poor credit scores end up paying 80% more for car insurance on average in that zip code, at least in Washington, than a rich person. And depending where you shop, that could be greater. The cheapest rate that they found for a person with a poor credit score was about $1,000 a year. And the cheapest rate they found for somebody with an excellent credit score was about $372 a year. So they end up making, on average, about $400 more on a poor person than on a rich person, using this policy.
And much like our tax structure, it's inverted. The people who can least afford to pay are the ones who are getting charged the most. It seems to me that there would be a knock-on effect with this, right? That this would indirectly lead to more uninsured motorists being on the road, and also raising interest rates for raising rather insurance rates for everybody. Is this proven out?
Yeah, Washington has one of the highest uninsured rates in the country. We're seventh the last time they checked, and we also, and because when there's when we have higher, there's a bunch of people on the roads who don't have insurance, then the uninsured motorist premium that people buy when they buy car insurance also raises. So yeah, it ends up hitting everybody.
Are there other states that have legislation like this, and what are the results?
Yeah, California, Hawaii, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Utah all ban the use of credit scoring when you're setting auto insurance premiums. At least they have other restrictions on home and other kinds of insurance, but they all band together on that. And yeah, I mean, somehow auto insurance companies still find a way to sell policies to people in California and in Michigan. The results are kind of hard to measure. Massachusetts, which bans using credit scores for auto insurance, has one of the lowest uninsured rates, but Michigan has one of the highest. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag using that metric, but they make money in those states,
Well, so let's talk about what happened to the bill in the Senate Business Committee, because as I mentioned, the bill that made it out of the committee has been amended. It no longer resembles the original bill, which was written by Senator Mona Doss. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, well, rather than ban the practice outright, the bill now directs insurance companies to use the highest credit score available whenever they renew a policy for one of their clients. And auto insurance policies renew about every 6 months or a year, depending. The idea was to, like, if your credit score dipped as a result of the pandemic, then this would tell the insurance companies to use your higher credit score, the one you used before the pandemic destroyed your finances or whatever. But the law doesn't take effect until October of this year, so it would only help people whose credit rating suffered after this upcoming October. So if you lost your job before and that taints your credit score, or if you got a divorce or whatever before, because credit scoring, first of all, there's a bunch of different kinds of credit scoring authorities, and they each measure different kinds of things. And the things that they measure are not like, did Rich pay his bills on time or whatever? It's like, how many and what kinds of credit cards did Rich select, and does he have too many retail credit cards or too many? Like, it's not the best measure for a lot of reasons to determine whether or not somebody could pay their bills or whether or not somebody is good behind a wheel. You know what I'm saying? But in any event, getting back to the point, if your credit tanked before October of this year, then you're still screwed. And if you try to get a new insurance policy, you want to go shop around, the new rule wouldn't apply to a new policy. It only applies to renewing policies.
Right. Understood. So how did this amendment happen? Who were the players? What were the mechanisms? How did this amendment basically water down this bill into nothing?
Senator Mullet didn't respond to a comment, so I did. Yeah, Senator Mark. Sorry, yeah, Senator Mark Mullet didn't respond to a request for comment, so I didn't get a chance to talk with him about his conversations on this. But during the committee hearing on the bill, other members of the Senate's Business Committee thanked him for his work in negotiating with stakeholders and the bill sponsor, Senator Mona Doss, stakeholders being, of course, the insurance companies who don't want this to pass. And so he had a central role in striking this, what he would call a compromise.
He is the chair of the Senate Business Committee, correct?
That's right. He's the chair, and so he controls ultimately what goes through his committee.
So he is ultimately the one who is responsible for watering this bill down. And I hear people kind of scratching their heads going, hey, Mark Mullet, I've heard that name, but I can't place him. You've dumped a lot of ink on Mark Mullet over the past couple of years. What else do we know him for?
You're not wrong. And this is not the first time that Mark Mullet has carried water for the insurance companies. Just last year, for instance, he tried to create a multi-million-dollar loophole for big businesses who use captive insurers. And and sometimes when I want to go to sleep, I just talk to myself about captive insurers. But it's actually it's a big deal, and he tried to create a huge loophole to make it easier for businesses. And so it basically means that businesses wouldn't pay a insurance premium tax that they should pay. And he wanted to make sure that didn't happen and that businesses could continue using those insurers without paying for the right to do so. But that's not the only thing, obviously, that he's done in recent memories. He's worked to block the capital gains tax. He's worked to block climate change bills, low carbon fuel standard. You might have remembered him for voting against a bill that would have repealed Washington's ban on affirmative action. He also, during the pandemic, threw ice cream social in around the Issaquah neighborhoods for kids. It was like it was outdoors or whatever, but it was in the time when we all didn't know much about the difference between outdoors and indoors. He has a pool in his McMansion that was installed in the middle of the pandemic, again outdoors, but he's that kind of guy. Senator Mullet is a former bank executive for the Bank of America, who now owns a couple of Ben & Jerry's ice cream shops and pizza places in Issaquah. And what's good for business is what's good for Washington. That's his deal. And even if in this case, it sounds like there's a disparate impact for using this insurance policy.
Well, that guy, people are now saying, yes, that rings a bell. So the call to action, gang, here is if you live in the 5th LD, call Senator Mullet, ask him to remove the amendment and pass the original bill. And if you are outside of the 5th LD, call your senator and talk to them to support the original bill and ask Senator Mullet to remove the amendment. Rich Smith, thank you so much as always, man. It's good to talk to you.
My pleasure. It's good to talk to you both.
And so, Shasti, before we go, you have a benefit concert this Saturday that is super exciting. We did a piece on it on the pod yesterday, but remind us one more time. Tell us about it.
Yes, I'm so excited. So tomorrow is our big Opportunity Washington concert that is celebrating women of color leaders here in Washington State. And our big headliners are Shaka Khan and Andra Day. And then we have local celebs like Lady A, who was on your show yesterday, the real Lady A. And then it's hosted by Angela Russell from King 5's evening TV show. And you can watch it tomorrow at 9 p.m. on Kong, which is on Channel 6 in Western Washington. And then for those of you in Eastern Washington, it's going to broadcast next weekend, March 6th, 8 p.m. on KSKN.
And it is benefiting such a great organization. I am so impressed, not surprised, but very impressed at your ability to both create the amazing organization that you have and also to put on this A-list celebrity event, Chastity. You are a force of nature, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Well, gang, that is it for this week in review. For Shasti Conrad and Will Casey, I'm Stephen Cox, and we will see y'all next week. Bye.